بسم اللہ. خواتین جو جماعت کی نماز پڑھنا چاہتی ہیں اوپر آ جائیں. پردہ کھینچا گیا ہے اور انتظام ہو گیا ہے. بسم اللہ.
سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر. اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر. اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان محمد الرسول اللہ. اشہد ان محمد الرسول اللہ. اشہد ان علی ولی اللہ. اشہد ان علی حجت اللہ. حی علی الصلاۃ حی علی الصلاۃ حی علی الفلاح حی علی الفلاح حی علی خیر العمل حی علی خیر العمل. اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر. لا الہ الا اللہ لا الہ الا اللہ.
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. اللہم اجعل قلبی بارا وعیشی قارا ورزقی دارا واولاد برارا واجعل لی عند خبر نبیک محمدا صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم مستقرا وقرارا برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین.
سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر. اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر. اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان محمد رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم. اشہد ان محمد رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم. اشہد ان امیر المومنین و امام المتقین علی ولی اللہ و وصی رسول اللہ و خلیفۃہ بلا فصل صلوات اللہ وسلامہ علیہ. اشہد ان امیر المومنین وإمام المتقين علي ولي الله ووصي رسول الله وخليفته بلا فاصل صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العظیم وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد سمع اللہ لمن حمدہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العلی وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد اللہ اکبر استغفر اللہ ربی واتوب الیہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العلی وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد اللہ اکبر بحول اللہ وقوتہ اقوم واقعد بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم الحمد للہ رب العالمین الرحمن الرحیم مالک یوم الدین ایاک نعبد و ایاک نستعین اہدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین انعمت علیہم غیر المغضوب علیہم ولا الضالین بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم قل هو اللہ احد اللہ الصمد لم یلد ولم یولد ولم یکن لہ کفوا احد کذالک اللہ ربی اللہ اکبر اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد ربنا اغفر لی ولوالدی وللمؤمنین یوم یقوم الحساب رب ارحمہما کما ربیانی صغیرا ربنا آتنا فی الدنیا حسنة وفی الآخرۃ حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العظیم وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد سمع اللہ لمن حمدہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العلی وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد اللہ اکبر استغفر اللہ ربی واتوب الیہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العلی وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد اللہ اکبر الحمد للہ اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ وحدہ لا شریک لہ واشہد ان محمدا عبدہ ورسولہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد بحول اللہ وقوتہ اقوم واقعد سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر استغفر اللہ ربی واتوب الیہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربی العظیم وبحمدہ اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد سمع اللہ لمن حمدہ اللہ اکبر سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم واحشرنا معهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله السلام اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد دعاء امام زمان بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طاعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله ووصي رسول الله وخليفته بلا فاصل صلوات الله وسلامه عليه أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله ووصي رسول الله وخليفته بلا فاصل عليه الصلاة والسلام حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العالى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي العلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي العلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي العلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم واحشرنا معاهم الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر اللهم صل على
يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم
السلام علیک یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیک یا حبیب اللہ، السلام علیک یا نبی اللہ، السلام علیک یا امیر المومنین، السلام علیک یا سید الوصین، السلام علیک یا علی ابن ابی طالب، السلام علیک یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدۃ نساء العالمین، السلام علیک یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ، السلام علیک یا ابا محمد حسن المجتبیٰ، السلام علیک یا ابا عبد اللہ، السلام علیک یا ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلی اولاد الحسین وعلی اصحاب الحسین، السلام علیک یا ابا الفضل العباس، السلام علی علی ابن الحسین، السلام علی محمد ابن علی، السلام علی جعفر ابن محمد، السلام علی موسیٰ ابن جعفر، السلام علیک یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیک یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیک یا سلطان العرب والعجم، یا علی ابن موسیٰ الرضا ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علی محمد ابن علی، السلام علی علی ابن محمد، السلام علی حسن ابن علی، السلام علیک یا مولانا یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان الامان الامان، السلام علیک یا خلیفۃ الرحمن، السلام علیک یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیک یا مظہر الایمان، السلام علیک یا امام الانس والجان، عجل اللہ تعالی فراجک وسهل اللہ تعالی مخرجک وظہورک، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجہم، السلام علیکم۔ وعلیکم السلام ورحمۃ اللہ۔
I ask everyone to please have a seat. We will be starting shortly.
That's good. Should I start? Come on. शुरू कर दो. बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात. अल्लाहुम्मा मुजरे खल्क में इन आँखों ने क्या क्या हाँ, देखा, 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 क्या क्या مجرئی خلق میں ان آنکھوں نے کیا کیا ہاں دیکھا پر کہیں سے بیتے پیمبر سنا آقا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں نے دیکھا عالم شاہ کو آلودہ خون میں نے دیکھا عالم شاہ کو آلودہ خون میں نے عباس کو بے جان لب دریا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں نے دیکھا علی اصغر کا گلا خون میں تر میں نے زخمی علی اکبر کا کلیجہ ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں ایک گٹھری شہدی پشت پہ لائے جس میں ایک گٹھری شہدی پشت پہ لائے جس میں میں نے ٹکڑے ہوئے قاسم کا سراپا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں اور گر پڑے سبی تے نبی تھام کے ہاتھوں سے جگر علی اکبر کو جو ریتی پہ تڑپتا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں اور ظلم مجھے رئیس جاد نے کیا کیا دیکھا ظلم مجھے رئیس جاد نے کیا کیا دیکھا گھر لٹا قید ہوئے باپ کا لاشا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں ان آنکھوں نے کیا کیا ہاں دیکھا مجرئی خلق میں بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات
صلوات قاسم جو ہم شبیے جناب امیر تھا اس وجہ سے وہ غیرت میرے منیر تھا اور عاشق جمال شہ بے نظیر تھا. پروانہ چراغ رسول قدیر تھا, پروانہ چراغ رسول قدیر تھا. اکبر سے کہتا تھا کہ چچا تو امام ہے, اے بھائی جان ہم تو تمہارے غلام, اے بھائی جان ہم تو تمہارے غلام ہیں. یہ کہتے تھے کہ تم میرے دادا کی شان ہو, دل ہو جگر ہو آنکھ ہو بھائی کی جان ہو. اے بھائی جان کیا تیری خوبی بیان ہو, حضرت حسن کی طرح سے شیریں زبان ہو, حضرت حسن کی طرح سے شیریں زبان ہو. پھر پیار سے وہ ہاتھوں کو گردن میں ڈال کے کہتے تھے قتل ہوں گے ہم 18 سال, کہتے تھے قتل ہوں گے ہم 18 سال. فوج جفا سے اتنے میں تیرے جفا چلے اور یہاں سے پیشوائی کو اہل وفا چلے. آئی خدا کی سمت سے سوئے خدا چلے, کہتے تھے شاہ زور مقدر سے کیا چلے, کہتے تھے شاہ زور مقدر سے کیا چلے. قاسم رہے اور اکبر و عباس رہ گئے, 70 تن میں 3 جواں پاس رہ گئے, 70 تن میں 3 جواں پاس رہ گئے. اس غم سے جو حسین کی حالت ہوئی تباہ, تب ہاتھ پکڑے خیمے میں قاسم کو لائے شاہ. زینب سے پھر یہ بولے امام فلک پناہ, درپیش تم کو آج دو بے قصوں, درپیش ہم کو آج دو بے قصوں کا بیاہ. تقریب سوگواروں میں دولہا دلہن کی ہے, زینب اٹھو اٹھو یہ وصیت حسن کی ہے, زینب اٹھو اٹھو یہ وصیت حسن کی ہے. ابن حسن کو لا کے لباس حسن پہنا, قاسم کی ماں کو مادر کبریٰ کو جل دلا. وہ بولی جان بوجھ کے بھیا نہ یہ سناؤ, اس کام کے لیے تو کسی اور کو بلا, اس کام کے لیے تو کسی اور کو بلا. ماتم کے گھر سے کوئی بھی جاتا ہے بیاہ میں, بیٹو موئی کو کوئی بلاتا ہے بیاہ میں, بیٹو موئی کو کوئی بلاتا ہے بیاہ میں. جن ہاتھوں سے کہ بیٹوں کی لاشیں اٹھاؤں میں, ان ہاتھوں سے بھتیجے کو دولہا بناؤں میں. فرش عزا جہاں پہو صف ماتم بچھاؤں میں, کبریٰ کو ماں لباس عروسی پہناؤں میں, کبریٰ کو ماں لباس عروسی پہناؤں میں. کیوں کر بھلا یہ اسے ہو جو خیر خواہ ہو, میری تو یہ دعا ہے مبارک یہ بیاہ ہو, میری تو یہ دعا ہے مبارک یہ بیاہ ہو. یادش بخیر فاطمہ صغریٰ نہیں یہاں, رخصت کے وقت کہتی تھی مجھ سے وہ ناتواں. قاسم کا بیاہ ہوئے सफ़र में जो नागहां तुम मुझको याद करके बुला लीजिए, तुम मुझको याद करके बुला लीजिए वहाँ। अफसोस की जगह है कोई नामबर नहीं, कासिम का ब्याह होता है उसको खबर नहीं, कासिम का ब्याह होता है इसको खबर नहीं। शह ने कहा बहना तरद्दुद करो जरा, मातम का अपने बेटों के यहाँ उज़्र है बजा, ये अक़्द भी है फ़िदियाए सिबते रसूल का, शादी कुजा और आले रसूल खुदा कुजा, शादी कुजा और आले रसूल खुदा कुजा। जाएगा ना मुराद ये दूल्हा जहान से, ताहश्र शादी उठ गई इस खानदान से, ताहश्र शादी उठ गई इस खानदान से।
Assalamu alaikum. Please, let's begin with a loud salawat. So I don't have to explain the significance of tonight, but tonight is 7th Muharram, the 8th lecture of Sayyid Ali Abbas Razawi, the topic being returned to their origin. And before we begin with the Maulana, a couple of key announcements. Once again, please comply with the parking volunteers. They are working hard. They are sacrificing not being inside the Majlis so that we can be inside the Majlis. So please comply with the parking volunteers. Some announcements about Ashura. So there will be a julus, as I mentioned yesterday. It will be at 10 a.m. It's going to start the same place. There will be a parking voucher available for $10. And more information will be given tomorrow night about that. The program will start with Majlis Azan Hazrat Ali Akbar at 4 a.m. And then there's going to be Amale Ashura at 8 a.m. And then there will be one bus from Husaini that will leave, but it's first come, first serve. So if you want to get on that bus, please be here on time. Right after the Amal, the bus will leave. Then the Shahadat Majlis will start sharp at 2:15 p.m. And then Sham al-Ghariba will be at 8:35 p.m. sharp after Namaz al-Maghrib. Brothers and sisters, those inside the hall, those inside the cars, and those at home, I have been mentioning for the past few nights about the fundraising that is going to be happening on 8 Muharram. Once again, I am asking you every night, please take the initiative to go to IECHUSAINI.org and donate, or use Zelle to go to IECZPay786@hotmail.com. Loud salawat, please. But tomorrow on 8 Muharram, we will be doing fundraising during the Majlis. So we're going to take a small break during the Majlis, both in the English Majlis and the Urdu Majlis, just like we do annually. So tomorrow, please come prepared. Say Labbaik Ya Abbas and come and participate in this fundraiser. As we know, we have a variety of programs scheduled throughout the year, including Muharram and Safar. You guys have had the calendar that's available to you now. As I have mentioned, we still have a $500,000 loan that we have to pay off. So please take part in this. There's also a Sabil Imam Hussain outside in the parking lot, so please stop by. Tomorrow there will also be announcements on behalf of the Bakhi team with updates. So for those of you who have picked up your Bakhi shirt, please wear it tomorrow. And if you still need a Bakhi shirt, please contact a Bakhi representative. Tomorrow on 8 Muharram, just like annually, there will be a Majlis at Dr. Shafiq Badar's residence in Itasca. The Majlis will start right after Husaini. And over there, Zakir al-Abed, Janab Jawad Razvi will recite the Majlis. And once again, just like the past 2 nights, there will be a tabood that will come after the Majlis. So I request all the youngsters and the fathers who want to send their young children to please send your children to the back right when Masayib starts so that they can take part in this. Now, once again, before I begin, we don't want to delay this further. I'm going to ask everybody, please come up to this line over here so that we can begin the Majlis promptly. Loud salawat. And with this, I'd like to request Maulana Syed Ali Abbas Razawi to recite the Majlis.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أما بعد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. A series of discussions have gone into its 8th night. It's bewildering how quickly these nights are going. It seems almost yesterday that we were together starting the first of Muharram and the moon of Muharram. As is the case, life is such that life takes us on. And in these last days, you find that when barakah is lifted from time itself, then time begins to accelerate. The only thing that remains is the dhikr of Husain. For all of those people who are here today, who are seated, sitting, listening, watching, each one of us will perish. In a generation or two, you'll find that many people will not be here. And perhaps in 100 years' time, none of us will be here. But the one thing that will be here is the dhikr of Husain. And so therefore remember this. We have been given the honor and the pleasure to be part of this mission. When you take a step on a working day to come here, to sit here, to listen, to partake, you're becoming part of history. Your names are written on this parchment that on the day of judgment, when Zahra alayhi salam opens it, names will be read out. History is being made, especially before the time of the Dhuhr. It's very important. Each one of you has a huge responsibility. You don't understand it, but more than any other time in history, this is that time. This is that moment where you find that you can make a difference. You can spread this religion. You can remember Husain. But look, it's very easy to have your name on there, but it's very difficult to maintain your name on there. Let me give you an example. Once upon a time there was a reciter, a very famous reciter, I won't mention his name. He sees in a dream that Sayyid al-Shuhada is dictating the names of all of those people who have contributed to the Azah. So he sees that his name is on there as well. One by one the names are being read out. Then Sayyid al-Shuhada goes, right, now cut this person's name out. Now cut this person's name out. Now cut this person's name out. After doing all of that, an entire lifetime spent in the service of Sayyid al-Shuhada, it's very easy to have your name wiped out. Why? Because of one's own actions. Remember this, nobody is bigger than the cause itself. Nobody is bigger than this majlis itself. Nobody should ever have a chip on their shoulder if Ahlul Bayt give him respect. Because that respect comes when there's humility. You find that that name is shone all over the world. Sometimes you notice this, right? Some of the best, biggest reciters in the world may not even have the best voice, but Allah has elevated them to the highest level because of their sincerity. It is service in the way of Sayyid al-Shuhada that makes you famous, that gives you the respect. And for all of those people, whichever center in the world that you're sitting in today, know that it is the humility of a person that Hussein ibn Ali likes. And for us, it's therefore important to go forward in that particular way. You'll see that people organize majalis. It's important to do so. People come forward, they recite. People come forward, they recite ziyarah. The intention is just one thing. In the words of the sixth Imam, the entire purpose is to gladden the heart of Fatima alayhi salam. So whenever even an ounce of arrogance comes, and again, I'm not saying this for our elders know this, but our youngsters who are starting, when fame is thrusted in front of you, then it's very simple and very easy to get arrogant. But I tell you one thing, some of the best reciters in the world that I've come across who are all of them today are very close friends. The secret of this is that whenever the majlis happens, especially as somebody who recites Noha or Latam or whatever it may be, you find that they're never out. The big reciters are never outside. They're in the majlis from beginning to end. In the same way, those people who are on the mimbar, you also find humility with them. You find the fact that they're one with the people. Of course, you get tired after majlis on majlis. You do get tired. But there's a level of humility. There's no demands above and beyond. You know why? Because this cause is bigger than me and is bigger than you. This cause is big. And so for that purpose, it's important for us to remember this. That as these nights are going, that as these nights are passing, remember, refocus yourself. At the moment, we're on a spiritual high. We're moving in that direction. We're feeling it. Day by day, you're finding that there's an intensity in the heart which is coming. I'm seeing children arguing with their parents, I want to go to the majlis, I want to go to the majlis. Parents are saying, it's too late, you got to go to sleep, you got to rest, whatever. They're saying, no. You see, Hussein is such that remember, when the fathers and the mothers are not capable, he comes to the children and says, children, if ever you see our bodies lying there, just come and put some dirt on. You know what the secret to that is? Imam Hussein has gone to every nasl, to every generation, to every age. He said to the men and the women, and he said to the children, where the men and the women fall short, you'll see the children stand up and say, if you're not going, we're going to go to Hussein ibn Ali's majlis. See that, it's happening, it's in front of us, it's developing, it's moving, it's going in that direction. Don't ever underestimate it. Hussein doesn't need you. You need Hussein. Your arrogance goes, Hussein will cut you out. You're out. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need your voice. He doesn't need your majlis. He doesn't need me on the mimbar. But you know what? It's a tawfiq that we're here. It's lutf of the Imam that we're here. And remember one thing. Hussein's heart is expansive. So he gives you chances. There's one place though that becomes difficult. You know what that is? Look at the hadith, right? Let me give you a story. Now work with me. Follow me on this. Let me give you a story. There's a companion of the Prophet by the name of Sa'd ibn Ma'ad. He was a shaheed in the Battle of Khandaq. Famous Sahabi. And the tradition says the Prophet himself goes and lifts his body, shrouds him, clothes him, prays over him, takes him to the graveyard, buries him. And then after that the Prophet says, well look, there's fishar in his qabr, there's pressure of the grave. So people said, his wife came, she said, no, what's the story? You've done all of these things and the final thing is that this fishar? And he turned around and he said, yes, because he wasn't good to you in the way that he should have been. So forgive him so that Allah removes it. Question is asked here. Question is asked. Shaheed, you've heard, when the drop of a shaheed drops, all of his sins are wiped out. So why is he facing pressure of the grave? One reason. Because even shahadat can wipe out all sins but one. Haqqun nas. Until the people themselves, you don't make amends with them, it becomes a burden on your shoulders. So be very vigilant, be very careful. Even shahada doesn't wipe that out. If haqqun nas is on your shoulders, even if the Prophet prays over you, puts you in the grave like he did, Sunni Shia traditions have both said, Sa'ad there is still going through the pressure of the grave. Why? Because outside he was amazing, but there was an issue. He was angry with his wife. Look how daqiq Islam is. Look how precise Islam is. This is why, if we go back to what we said yesterday, in Akhir al-Zaman, in our traditions on Malahim wal Fitan, and the name itself is enough to scare you, on the end days, Malahim wal Fitan, when you see that, look inside of those traditions and see, the way of Dajjal is breaking human relationships. And when those human relationships are broken, suffering begins. Why? Because Allah removes barakah. Cousins don't speak to cousins today. Brothers and sisters don't speak to each other, and if they do, you find that they're insulting, they're patronizing to one another. Children are rejecting their parents, disowning them. They don't speak to their parents anymore. Days and weeks go by, not realizing that you're really tying a noose around your neck. And parents are turning their children away. Remember this. When a time like that comes, with this infighting taking place, then barakah is removed. It's very simple to fight, but it's very difficult to make it together. This is what akhlaq is about. Why do you think now that when Rasulullah was made a prophet, he says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ? Where does makaram al-akhlaq come? Not for yourself. Makaram al-akhlaq is on the relationships that you have. It's developing relationships. And this is what Islam came to perfect. What is Karbala? The entire Karbala is a show of relationships. How an aunt was with a nephew, with a niece, with their children, mother, father, how they enact in the time of the greatest difficulty known to man. And you find that in that situation, what happens? These are those people in that time of difficulty situation where they're able to enact the best of akhlaq. You find a nephew, look, if it was me there, what would I have done? If I was leading a family 3 days of thirst, I'd be snapping at that stage. Similarly, many other people would be. You'd be snapping, right? You'd be angry, you'd be upset. But what is Hussein? His mercy is increasing and increasing and increasing. So this is why the tradition says, Imam says, he says, look, if you ever want to make a friend, make sure you test them in 3 situations. If they pass those 3 situations, then they're a good friend. Otherwise, they're not a good friend. So what are those 3 situations? First situation is this. That you've tested them in anger. Why is that important for? Tested them in anger. You know why? Because when you're angry, this malaka inside of you comes out. Your actual essence comes out. Everything that's in your mouth comes out. Some people swear, some people shout. But in that time of extreme, you notice when a person is like Hussein ibn Ali, Rahmah begins to flow as malaka. Mercy. And Hussein doesn't get angry. But let's say on the battlefield when you're fighting, you've got to get angry, right? It's a human instinct that you've got to. But look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. The minute the enemy's back is turned, he stops. The minute somebody spits on his face, he stops. Overflow of mercy comes into play. That's what the Imam wants you to be. Imam wants you to be such that people gravitate to you because of the way that you are. There's something they become majzoob in your personality. Look, go back to the tradition and see. When a woman came to the Prophet of God and she said, tell us, Joseph had half of the beauty of the world. Women cut their hands, intoxicated in his beauty. They didn't realize. So the question was asked, what about you? In essence, who's more beautiful? And to sum up the answer, Rasulullah's character, personality has this jazibi in it, makes you majzoob in it. You melt inside it. It's like Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen has that much of an impact that even after his death, when a woman goes to Sham, she could have done taqiyya, she doesn't do. And Muawiyah asks her how Ali was, she says, don't talk about him, he is this and this and this. So Muawiyah asked the question, he says, what is it about Ali? Even after his death, in my court you're reciting the fadail of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why? Majzoob. People get sucked into it. It's a magnetic personality. And how does a Shia build that magnetic personality? Well, there's an overflow of mercy inside of them when they start manifesting the Jamali of Allah. And you can do that. You can develop yourself such that you can manifest the Jamali of Allah. How do you develop it the most? When you start purifying your heart from negativity. That's what Muharram, this is what your crying is about. You know why? Because all the stains start building up on a day. Whenever you're suspicious of somebody, whenever you look negatively to somebody, all of these things, you get dirt. How do you penetrate and go right into the essence? Inside of your heart, deep inside, lies the nur of Allah. Look, I remember I was having a conversation not too long ago with the son of Ayatollah Syed Abdul Karim Kashmiri. You know what he said to me? He said to me, my father directly said this to me. Now remember, when a guy at that caliber says something, it shakes your heart. Because you've got to understand, the person saying it counts as well. I tell you not to lie, one ear out the other. Somebody like Sheikh Bahjat tells you not to lie, it shakes the core of your body. Why? Because the person who's saying it is powerful. This is why you've got to understand. Ahlul Bayt's words, why they shook people by the core, why people changed in front of Ahlul Bayt within a second. It's the power of their kalam. In fact, not even that. Go and see Abul Fadl Abbas. Hadith 6th Imam says he had Nafadul Basira. His piercing vision when he looked at somebody changed people. In the words, when somebody asked Amir al-Mu'mineen, they said, who's greater, Salman or Abbas? Mawla stands up and he says, if my son was to look at somebody, he'd make him into Salman. 10th level of Iman. When no human beings reached. Why? Nafadul Basira. If he wanted to. That's who Abbas is. When the 6th Imam was asked, who's greater, Kumail or Abbas? He stands up, he said, my uncle Abbas, if he looked at the world, he could make the world into Kumail. This is what it is. This is the essence. This is the essence of a person who's intoxicated and annihilated in the ishq of Ali. One of them was Ayatollah Syed Abdul Karim Kashmiri. Ahl Qum would say, in the time of Saddam, those Najafiyun who went over, they said, look, when we missed the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we'd go to Ayatollah Kashmiri. When we looked at him, his entire body, wujud, was like the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. How does a person get to that stage that all they see is Amir al-Mu'mineen, right? Now imagine a man like that when he gives advice to his son. So he gave advice, and this is not secondary. I asked directly myself. And you know what he replied? Beautifully. He says, my father told me one hadith. When he was telling me, it was impacting me. You've heard the hadith, but I'll tell you. He says, son, remember one thing. Remember one thing. In life. And this is what he's saying here to his son, the closest to him. If you're a mystic of that caliber, what would you advise your son? He just, in his entire life, gave him one tradition. For him, he says, just remember this, my son. He says, one thing remember, is that your heart is the haram of Allah, is the place of God. Where does haram come from? Muharram come from? Ihram come from, right? All of these are similar. It says your heart is the haram, meaning what? There's a prohibition of everything but Allah in that heart. So he says, if you can only allow Allah to come into your heart and nobody else, if all of your life you spent removing ghayrullah from your heart and leaving Allah in your heart, you would achieve the highest level that you want to. You don't need to do anything else. Just safeguard your heart from everything else entering. Why? Because everything else is rich but Allah. And part of this loving Allah is loving Muhammad and Al Muhammad. We could have a loud salawat, please. Because their love is not separate. How do we know this? Look at it and see. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-harami al-masjid al-aqsa. Right? Who's that for? The Prophet. What is this verse beginning? Ma'raj. Prophet gets to the highest level. Abbas Razawi, right? At that point, what does the tradition say? It says he got so close to God that God wanted to talk to him. Now when he came back, one of the companions asked him, he said, how did God speak to you? And what does Allah say? Allah said, he started speaking to the Prophet in the voice of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So the Prophet said, Ali, is that you? He says, no, it's me, it's Allah. How comes you're speaking to me in the voice of Ali? He says, because I looked into your heart and I saw no one more beloved than Ali. This in itself tells us, ishq of Ali, ishq of the Prophet, equates back to the ishq of Allah. If you love the Prophet, you love Allah. If you love Ali, you love the Prophet, you love Allah. Ahlul Bayt has the same hukum. So therefore in this day and age, it's important for us to enhance that. How do we enhance that though? How do we do that? Is the question. How often do you remember Ahlul Bayt? Let me tell you something. We mentioned a couple of days ago Sheikh Ja'far Mujtahidi, right? Who was one of the 30 men of the 12th Imam. When one dies, another one comes, another dies. And this is why many of the Urfa have said, they said 90% of the time that those people who have claimed to have met the Imam, actually not met the Imam, they've met one of the companions of the Imams. So sometimes you go, you do an a'mal, you're stuck in a desert, you go to Hajj, you go to ziyarat, you see this Nurani person comes, he helps you, he disappears. Many people actually think that's the 12th Imam. For the vast majority of the time is one of the helpers of the Imam, right? Not saying that you can't do ziyarah of the Imam in ghaib, of course you can. It's haram to reveal it to people, it's not haram to see the Imam. It's two different things. So for the vast majority of people who are doing ziyarah of somebody, when they're thinking that I'm doing ziyarah of the Imam, actually it's one of his helpers. And that's fine. That's not a problem. But the one thing you need to remember is this. That when you look at somebody like Ja'far Mujtahidi, how did he get to that maqam? One, ishq of Ali. But there's another thing, and I'm going to tell you the secret. The reason being is that I want all of you to benefit. Otherwise, secrets are left as secrets. But because it's the time of bewilderment, it's important for you to remember this. Sheikh Ja'far Mujtahidi one day walks into a home where there were people there. And the first thing he says when he walks in, he goes, why is this room so dark for? So, all these lights are on. What are you talking about? He says, go and recite a hadith kisa so that this room can be munawwar. What does that tell you? Where there is no dhikr of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad in a household, there's no malaika that come down. Ja'far Mujtahidi would look at the malaika come down. He says, read hadith kisa. Now remember this. As we go forward, you're going to find a new fitna that's going to arise. It's already begun. That people will say, hadith kisa is weak, it's weak, it's weak. Now, no, this has already started many years ago in Qum. I still remember when some of my own peers, friends, or acquaintances, they weren't friends, but they were acquaintances, were saying, hadith kisa is weak, it's not in Fulan, and it's not this, and it's not that, and Sheikh Abbas Razawi. And I saw, when the debate was ongoing, Ayatollah Tabrizi died that year. In the 40th of the Majlis of Ayatollah Tabrizi, they're in front of us, they're still debating what should we do. Ayatollah Bahjat walks in. The minute that he walks in, everybody goes quiet. He says, hadith kisa bikhun, read hadith kisa. Everybody went quiet. They knew marja marja of the time, right? A man who has complete total grip over his nafs. A person whose eyes are open to a different reality. He says, read Hadith Qissa. Those people of the awliya Allah, their word is Hadith Qissa. Ayatollah Bahauddin, one of the most famous scholars that we've had in the 20th century. That Bahauddin that would go into a graveyard and people would say to him, Allah, go 5 minutes, just recite Fatiha and move. What are you doing just sitting there? What are you doing sitting there? He says, you don't know, I can see the pressure of the grave. I can see the adhab of the grave. I'm sitting here so that I can pray that it removes. That Bahauddin said. He said, if ever you fall into difficulty of any status, there are 4 things that you should recite. And I remember a very close relative of mine also told me this. He couldn't have children for 10 years. And I asked him and he said, I did this amal of Ayatollah Bahauddin and Allah gave me a daughter. 4 things that he said. They should, and this relative of mine is a mujtahid, he was a student of Ayatollah Wahid and so forth. But anyhow, he said that there were 4 things. Right? He said one of them is Hadith Qissa. From the 4 things you make an intention that I'll do 4 things. One of those things, Hadith Qissa. So remember, that is powerful. Read it, understand it, teach your children it. And if any time in your life you find a fitna arises where people are trying to destroy Hadith Qissa, our du'as, ziyarat, all of these things, be vigilant. Because they want to destroy your religion. Remember, ziyarat or the ziyarah that you recite, Bir al Yasin. Right? Be Ziyarat Jama Kabira, be Ziyarat Ashra. Be any of those ziyarat of Rajab. These are your relationship. It teaches you how to enact with your imam. So they're trying to destroy your relationship with your imam. Then they'll put ishkal on dua. They'll say this dua is incorrect, that dua is incorrect, this. Why? Because they're trying to destroy your relationship with Allah. And then finally, moving on, they'll come to the Quran eventually. And they'll say there's no sunnah to the Quran. They will say that, right? That's the development, because if you take it to that respect, they're going to say there's no sunnah to the... Eventually, they're going to try and deconstruct your entire faith. And there's answers to all of this. Believe me. If you want right now, we can sit down and discuss the 3 chains, at least that I know of Ziyarat Ashura, which Ayatollah Jubairi himself stamped. When this discussion was taking place, I remember, in front of me, there are 3 chains that some, again, a very close person of mine, there was a discussion, he says, take this and take it to Ayatollah Jubairi. When he sees this, he'll stamp it. Took it, all the chains, everything else. There's a lot of these ishkalat which are being brought forward. Are, as we would say, half-cooked, underbaked. If that's the case, then why are you Shia for? If you want to bring, why are you Shia for? Show me the sanad, show me the riwayat that proves the 12th Imam is born then. Right? If you want to take that methodology, both Sunnis and Shias, there are 3 individuals that will come, or 3 different traditions. One, that Jesus will come. Second, according to the Sunnis, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. According to the Shias, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan. Right? 3. The Sunni and the Shia tradition are weak compared to the first one, which is the one on Jesus. Many people think that Jesus is the Mehdi, right? Because of that. The awaited one. Know this though, that if we were to prove it, we can prove it. There are different methodologies. For example, first of all, you establish the 12 Imams. Establish who the 12 Imams are from the riwayat. Establish the parents of the Imams and so forth. There are different methodologies to prove different things. You cannot use just one methodology for everything. This is not taharat and najasat that you want to prove. There are various different methodologies for various different sciences. And look, this isn't the discussion for this. I don't want to go into this here, because there are other ulama who will address this and they'll do a better job than me over 10 days. And I'm here within 30 seconds trying to encapsulate it in. But just remember this. Your elders from the very beginning have had great belief in all of these ziyarat. There are a'mals, ulama, or afa who recite these. Just before, some of the great scholars I've seen, just before they go to sleep, they would recite Ziyat Al Yasin. They would recite these special du'as and dhikrs. But anyhow, I'm not going to go into detail. Maybe if we have another opportunity and Allah gives us life, then we can discuss this later. And I'd love to discuss this. We look at the discussion on the Isnad, Al-Mirajal. Again, we can discuss this. I'm writing on it at the moment. When it's published, you can have a look at it yourself later. But because it's a technical discussion, it's not worth bringing here. Some of these discussions require time. So remember one thing, our ulama, our maraji are not stupid. Ayatollah Khoui is not stupid. Ayatollah Sistani is not stupid. Just because you've reached a particular age and you've read 4 books, or 4.5, now you're not kulle iman and kulle ilm. Hadith says ilm humbles you, and you're arrogantly sitting there trying to attack. Where's the humility? And that too in Awam al-Nas? Come to the battlefield, come into the hawza and discuss it there. You're putting shubha in the minds of Awam al-Nas. You're dirtying their mind. What do Awam al-Nas know? Poor guys, they wake up in the morning, they go to work, they come back. They don't have time to sit down and go through the books, trail through them. But anyhow, look, that to one side. Coming back to the point. The point is, don't make your house dark. At least weekly recite Hadith Qissa. I've seen miracles with them myself. Because here we're doing tabligh, I'll tell you. Generally I wouldn't say this, but because we're doing tabligh, even myself, if ever God forbid, I feel something, I would recite Hadith Qissa. And I say to you as well. I say to my children, my grandchildren, my uncles, aunties, whatever it may be, recite Hadith Qissa. It's very powerful. Especially for your children. Especially for the safety of your children. Especially for the iman of your children. Why? Look at it itself and say, what happens? When the Shia gather together, Allah descends His mercy. Malaika come down. All your gham is removed. All of these things. Why? Because of the dhikr. You know why? No, let me take it one step forward. Why? Because this entire thing is who? Nisba to who? Hum Fatima wa abuha wa ba'luha wa banuha. Kimia Isma Adam is Fatima. The hadith itself is shouting out that I'm Sahih. Why? Fatima alayhi salam. You've got to be blind not to see it. But some people are blinded because they have not the tawfiq to understand the nur of Fatima. To those people who, for example, in the time of the Jahiliyyah would bury their daughters alive because they can't understand the ma'rifah of a woman. But let me tell you something. Islam circles around Fatima alayhi salam. This entire religion, the batin of this religion, rests on Fatima alayhi salam. You've not understood it, but that doesn't mean it's not correct. Why? Because Allah says, وَلَوْلَا فَاطِمَةَ لَمَا خَلَقْتُكُمَا. And that is a statement not for you and me only, but that is a statement for Muhammad and Ali alayhi salam. So look, what I wanted to discuss, again, I've been sidetracked. And it happens sometimes. But you know what? When I see children and youth in front of me, it's my responsibility to tell them, sons, be vigilant. Many people are going to want to destroy your faith. Whatever you do, Zahra said it in Fadak. In the very first year, in the couple of days after the Prophet's death, she told the entire Ummah categorically, Ata'at of the Ahlul Bayt takes you to unity. If you leave their pathway, it takes you to disunity. It takes you to confusion. Dhalala and dhulamat. Dhalala and dhulamat. Darkness and confusion. So remember, be guided. Hold on to this Ahlul Bayt. Let me come back now. Come back to the point. Come back to the beginning what I wanted to say. And that is this. How do these people get to the maqam that they get to? Look, now coming to the asl part of the discussion, I'm looking at the time, I'm conscious this time is passing fast. And I want to conclude very quickly so that you guys can go home and go to work and so forth tomorrow. But the one thing, look, Said Qadi says, now look, the great mystic, he says the spiritual pathway begins at home, begins in the family. Now, he's made a beautiful statement. The question is this, what does it mean? That the spiritual journey begins in the family. Let me give you a tradition so you understand, and then I'll move into what I wanted to say. There's a hadith that says that when a young man dies and he's single, he would want to be resurrected again, or if he had an opportunity to come back, the first thing the tradition said he would do is get married. Question is why? Very simply is this. Remember, the first stage of any form of peace is to identify your own vices so that you can overcome them. If you've identified them, only then can you do tawassul of the Imam. And the biggest tawassul is on Tuesday when you recite Dua Tawassul, but you can recite that every day. There are miracles for those people who recite Dua Tawassul for 40 days. And in fact, one of the great scholars in Qum was doing a research, and he gathered a lot of information of people who were reciting Dua Tawassul for 40 days. So one of the biggest and the most profound benefits of Dua Tawassul is to remove the negativity of your vices. So to let you know this, and remember this, what's important therefore is in your house, in your home when you go there, all of your vices come out. When you're single, you don't even know you have them. But the minute that you get married, your anger is tested. Yourself is tested in every single way. We recite a salawat, please. Recite us another salawat, please. And another salawat, please. Also going to request all of you who are sitting in the old hall to come forward, please, as much as possible with a loud salawat. And one more salawat, please. And one more salawat, please. Why is marriage important, or why is the family system important, especially within Islam? Is because all of your vices are highlighted. And so therefore your responsibility becomes even more. You understand now, hang on a minute, I can lose my temper very quickly. Hold on a minute, I can be disrespectful to my wife when I'm angry. Hold on a minute, I'm actually very stingy when it comes to releasing money. Hang on a minute, I'm very dirty because I leave my socks lying around everywhere, for argument's sake. Not realizing as a partnership. In the house, people say, oh no, we're going to take care of our hukuk. House is not there for hukuk, outside is there for hukuk. House is there for akhlaq. If a man says to me, oh no, my wife is not observing my hukuk, or we're going to just live a life of hukuk, if that's the case, then she doesn't need to cook for you, clean for you, take care of your children. And she doesn't even need to work, by the way. So what you need to do for her is you need to provide her clothing and shelter and food, and then take care of the kids and clean the dishes and make the food. So don't talk about hukuk, talk about akhlaq. Because your life will get quite difficult if you start talking about hukuk. You can imagine walking through and you said, look, haq, go clean. Hey, there's your kids crying, take care of them. Right? What you need to talk about is akhlaq. Why? Because akhlaq builds love. Like we said yesterday, the Prophet of God says, when two human beings, when a wife and a husband sit down together and talk, just talk, 500 years worth of worship are given to them. Just talk, love, development. They say for argument's sake, when a wife sees her husband's thirsty and out of love she brings a glass of water, what was it, 1,000 years? All fasting throughout the daytime, Salatul Layl at nighttime, that's the reward of it. Why? Because the purpose is to develop love. When love develops, and when you manifest that love, only then can your children come to appreciate love. If all your children are seeing is arguments, even psychologically, forget Islam for a minute, even psychologically that's detrimental. Now why is it today that I mention this? The reason being is this, because tonight we're going to be mourning over Hazrat Qasim. And Qasim was a yatim. So it's important for you to remember that love. If the nucleus of the family is solid, only then can this message of Ahlul Bayt go forward. Otherwise you're handicapping your children to go. Look, I'm not saying divorce doesn't happen. Okay, even if it does happen, amicable, respectful, taking care of the children, not your own egos. I'm going to clean this person out. I'm going to restrict their life so much that they won't even be able to see their children for 6 months. That's haram. That's animalistic. More than that, that's ego. And we don't have space for that because the Prophet said akhlaq. These are important. Important steps. That if we can reform society, we can build that relationship, how to respect your parents. Look, let me give you a tradition. Shaykh Mutahiri says, you've all heard of him, so I don't need to explain who he is. He had a teacher in akhlaq. That teacher in akhlaq was a person by the name of Mirza Ali Shirazi. That Mirza Ali Shirazi, one day was cold. He went out, he went to the haram, whatever it was, he spent a long time there. He came back home. When he was coming back, the entire streets were dark. When he came to his house, he realized, I forgot my key. Looked up, he saw the light is switched off, his wife is sleeping. What did he do? It's cold, it was in fact snowing. What would you have done? 109% of the time you would have knocked on the door. What does Mirza Ali Shirazi do? He goes to a corner of the street, puts his abba around. He says, I've been late. My poor wife has just got to sleep. I can see the light switched off. Why should I disturb her? The minute he makes that intention and he wraps himself around in his abba, his wife sees a dream. In that dream, Sahib al-Zaman comes. Says that your husband downstairs is waiting. Please go downstairs and open the door. She gets up and she opens, and he was huddled up in his abba. When she saw that, she asked, why didn't you knock on the door? He replied, I didn't want to disturb you. What happened? Love developed. Why does a 12th Imam want to do that for? Because he knows he's the master of your times. He wants you to have love in your family. Why are you removing it? This is why. You look at the hadith, right? Look, forget the hadith. Look at the Quran now. What does the Quran say? What's the purpose? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Mawadda, as we said in the last couple of days, is active love. The only other time you see mawadda is when Allah says in the Quran to the Prophet, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. See how it's all linked together? That's the importance. Like my topic not at all was about the family. I don't engage in these things, I leave it to other people to look at. But the reason why I mention this is because in spirituality, and our topic from the beginning has been Noor. To harness the Noor of the Ahlul Bayt requires that you fulfill the huquq of the people around you. And the only way you can do that is through akhlaq and love. In the household, it's not just about observing of rules and regulations. In the household, it's about love. Look, let me give you one more story. Look, time is flying. Just want to give you one more, then I'll come to an end. Yesterday we mentioned the story of Hashim Haddad, said Hashim Haddad. We said that when he went to Qadi, and he said, look, my mother-in-law and my wife, they taunt me, can I get a divorce? And he said, sabr. Qadi said it. Hashim Haddad. Now Hashim Haddad himself narrates. He says, I went quiet. I didn't say anything then. Said a day came. That day my mother-in-law was really going at me. And I remained quiet and I did dhikr of Allah. He said a time came where I saw myself divide into two people. And I saw myself rising, and I could see under me my body and my mother-in-law. She was screaming and shouting. And I realized at that stage that I'd learned the ability to die in free will, maut ikhtiyari. The ability to be, one of the highest levels of spirituality is the ability to remove your soul. They say, for example, said Ahmad Kashmiri, who they would call Qadi Thani, the second Qadi. So they say Ayatollah Qadi had three top students. Ali Muhammad Burujurdi, Sheikh Bahjat, and Said Ahmed Karbalai, Said Ahmed Kashmiri. Said Ahmed Kashmiri is buried in Srinagar, in Kashmir today. His grandson at the moment is writing a book on the karamat of his life. Spoke to him about a month ago. That Said Ahmed Kashmiri is famous for him that when he went to the doctor, right towards the last moments of his life, the doctors were shocked. They said, your vital organs are dead. How are you still alive? Sahib Karamat. So Abdul Karim Kashmiri says that this guy never slept at night time. He always worshipped Allah. And towards the end of his life, he would consistently recite 12,000 times dhikr al-tawheed. I'm not going to mention it just in case some guy thinks that I can do the same thing. And within 2 weeks he's packed up as well and the blame comes onto us. 12,000 times he'd recite dhikr al-tawheed. What that is, we'll go into it some other time. But that's a lot of, 12,000 is a lot of times to recite. It's not easy. If I ask you to recite 12,000 salawats, how long will it take you? Now recite that every single day and you'll come to realize an ounce of what these guys are doing. It's like what Atullah Khoui said. Atullah Khoui was, to begin with, he was a student of Sayyid Qadi. So got to a stage one day, he said, look, you know, Qadi is too much, man. I said, why? He goes, you've got me in sajda reciting 400 times Ayatul Kursi. He goes, I'm not going to become a mujtahid if I'm doing this. So Sayyid Ali Qadi smiled. He said, okay, don't worry, leave it. I'll give you one more amal. You do this Surah Qadr amal in Ramadan. And that's it. Go continue your studies. You'll become a marja. You'll see yourself what you're going to become. But remember, Qadi is a doctor of the soul. He's a tabib of your nafs. So he knows. Now that we're on it, I might as well give you a story about him if you're with me. And if you are, recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There was a gangster in Najaf by the name of Qasim. Well, you can imagine, a gangster. Or in our words, what we'd call a gangster. You know, petrifying the people. But he had a really good relationship with Sayyid Qadi. So every time Sayyid Qadi walked by, he would sit down and he would like wave at him and salute him and, you know, I'm smaller than you and, you know, please give me your blessings and so forth. So when Sayyid Qadi was walking and this Qasim said, he said, Sayyid Qadi came to me and he said to me, look, you know, can I ask you for a favor? He says, yeah, of course. What if anything for you? He says, I want you to give me your word as a man. He says, sure, I'll give you my word as a man that I'm going to do it. Now remember, you've got to accept that as well. You can't be a person. You see, even sometimes people you think are not good people, but they have quality in them. One of the quality is truthfulness. However bad you become, if you've got truthfulness in you, you'll see Allah will guide you. But anyhow, that's another topic for another day. The importance of truthfulness. And we'll get to that another stage if Allah gives us life. Now, check this out. So here, Qadi turns around and says, look, you know, I want to ask you something. If you can fulfill this, then I'll be grateful. You promised me as a man. He says, yeah, ask me. He says, look, you know, just before Fajr, I want you to get up and recite 2 units of prayer of Salatul Layl, just 2. He goes, Qadi, I don't even wake up for Fajr. I sleep until Dhuhr. And you're asking me to recite 2 units? He says, you promised me as a man. He said, fine. Qasim says, I put my head down and I started to recite. He was a tabib of the nafs. He knows exactly. If it was me and you, we would have said, go and recite Fajr and then Dhuhr. No, Qadi said just before Fajr. Why? Because that period is golden for enlightenment. If I had time, we'd go into it. I'm running out of time. I've run out of time. Inshallah, if we get time tomorrow, we'll go into it. Why that period is a very golden period. Anyhow, Qadi saw his soul. He told him to do so. He did it. That person became a student of Qadi. Later on, people in Najaf would take his leftover food for barakas purposes, tabarruk purposes. That's a man who's been held by somebody trained in the spiritual sciences of the Ahlul Bayt. Now imagine if Hussein ibn Ali took your hand, what would happen? That's the maqam you want to get to. This is why the Majlis of Hussein is here. The Majlis of Hussein is here that you're asking Sayyid al-Shuhada, take me by the hand and take me to where you're going. But tonight is a heavy night. Taboot will come after. The Ziyad will come after. Tonight's a heavy night. Tonight I want all of you to remember, you're going to give condolences for a child who's a yatim. I'm going to read slowly. Give you an opportunity to cry. Because these are the nights of crying now. Only a few nights are left. Sometimes we dim the lights because it's sunnah. In the time of the Imam would say, dim the lights. Maybe somebody may feel embarrassed. Look, I don't even need to say anything. I just need to say Hussein. Don't be embarrassed tonight. You know why? Fatima Zahra feels a lot of pain for this son of hers. There was a wa'iz in Karbala. He came off the mimbar, went to sleep that night. That night he saw a woman dressed in black come to him. She says to him, Mawa'iz, why don't you recite the musib of my son Hassan? Reply comes, says, I do recite the musib of your son. I recite the fact that he vomited blood out. I recite that when he was poisoned by his wife. The tradition says, Sayyid al-Shuhada was standing there. Imam Hassan says to his brother, he says, bring me a bowl. He says, why? He says, because I'm going to vomit. In the words of the tradition, parts of his liver was vomited out. Now what that means, I don't know, but he vomited. And then the first thing he said was this, Hussein, hide it. I said, why, brother? He said, Zainab's coming. Zainab's coming, hide it. He hid it. Zainab comes and she looks, she begins to cry. Hussein begins to cry. In the process of crying, Imam Hassan looks towards Sayyid al-Shuhada and says, why do you cry for, brother? He says, I can't see you like this. At that point, Imam Hassan says, La yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. Because your day will be something else. There's no other day like yours. Tradition though says that a 1.5-year-old baby was crawling at that moment. That baby crawled and it jumped onto the chest of its father. Imam Hassan hugs that small 1.5-year-old baby. Farwa was standing there, she comes running and she says, son, your father's in a lot of pain. Imam Hassan says, leave my son, tomorrow he's going to become a yatim. Do you know what it is to become a yatim? Can I tell you? Look at this. The day of Eid comes in Medina. Every father is taking their son by the hand towards Masjid al-Nabawi to pray. They say one small boy gets up. In the morning when everybody was going towards prayer, he went to Baqi. He comes into Baqi, sits next to the grave of his father, says, Father, if only you were alive, you would have taken me by the hand to Masjid al-Nabawi as well. You haven't done justice to Qasim. So this wise says, he says, Zahra, I do recite the musib of your son. I recite that the coffin of your son was white. But for a second time it came back, it was red. A sister was sitting on her knees plucking every arrow out, remembering her mother. She turns around, she says, these are the masaib of my son, but they're not the biggest masaib. Says, so then I don't know what the biggest masaib is, you tell me. She replies, she says, the biggest masaib was this. My son was 8-year-old. There was an alleyway in Medina. His mother was walking back. Her feet were dragging on the ground. Why were they dragging? They say one arm over Ayman, the other one over Fidda. Her feet were dragging. Ulama have argued, they've said, was there a drag mark on the floor? The reason being her feet were dragging. And as her feet were dragging, one man comes from behind. He grabbed her by the shoulder. And then after that, what he did, Zahra falls to the ground. When she falls to the ground, an 8-year-old boy comes running, says, don't harm my mother. If you want, hit me, but don't touch. He tries to lift his mother up. This is why they say, when Fidda would say, Hassan son, why do you cry more than Hussein? He says, Fidda, I was outside, he was inside. Today you're here to cry over the son, yatim son of Imam Hassan Qasim. If Allah gives me strength to recite, they say the 9th of Muharram comes. 9th of Muharram comes. 2 mothers throughout all of Karbala went to complain to Sayyidah Zainab. 2 mothers did. Complain in the sense that they had a pain in their heart. One of them was Farwa, the other one was Rabab. You know when Rabab complained? Shami Ghariba. You know when she complained? When Shimmer had grabbed her by the hair. And he was pulling her by the hair. That mother was screaming at the time. You know how hard the pull was of her hair? They say that when they were in Sham and the women were giving ghusl and kafan to Sakina, tradition says they came running to Imam Sajjad. They said, what happened to this girl? He said, why? They said, when we were pouring water over her hair was shredding, falling to the ground. He began to cry, so Shimmer would grab her by the hair and pull. Some of you have daughters. You remember when your daughter was young, and if you don't, you remember your grandchildren. Small daughter comes running. Look how masoom she is. Here's a man standing there, takes his hand, slaps her on the face. This girl falls to the ground in such a way that when the head of Imam Hussein finally came, you know what she says? She says, Father, forgive me that I stutter in my speech. When Shimmer slapped me on the face, it was so hard. Rabab complained. She said to Zainab, Zainab, look at my 4-year-old daughter, look what's happening to her. The other one was Farwa. When? 9th of Muharram. Nighttime comes. Look, I'm not going to recite all of it. You won't be able to take it, so I'll skip. I'll just come to this point. They say she was sitting in the tent. Farwa was sitting in the tent of Sayyidah Zainab. Now you know that when a woman is a widow, right? Everything that she has then, she invests into a child. Especially if she loved her husband. Somebody like Imam Hassan ibn Ali. She lived for her husband. She only had one son. They say as she was sitting there talking to Sayyidah Zainab, her ears picked something up. You know what it was? She heard her son crying. She looks up, she says, my yatim is crying. Sayyid, I'll be back in a minute. Let me just see why my yatim is crying. She opens up the tent. You know when you see a child crying, it puts his head, right? It puts his head between his knees. Forehead on his knees, right? You've seen a child do that. It says Imam Hassan's son, Qasim, had his forehead holding its legs around like this, his legs like this, had his head on his knee and he was crying. At that point, they say that Farwa goes up and she asks a question. She says, son, why are you crying for like this? You know what the reply comes? It says that uncle is not allowing me or telling me that if tomorrow my name is going to be written on those people who are shaheed. You know what Imam Hussein later tells them? He says, Qasim, your name is also there. Not just your name. Well, he doesn't say your name is there. He says even Ali Asghar's name is there. Qasim's ghayra couldn't take it. He says, are these men going to come into the tent? He says, no, you're going to go out. Don't worry. I'm going to take Ali Asghar out. Right? Ashura day comes. Like, I can't recite anymore. I'll just say one thing. Ashura day comes. When Ashura day comes, they say the sun is waiting. And he keeps on going up to Imam Hussein and asking. And every time Imam Hussein keeps on replying just one thing, saying that you're the sign of my brother. How can I let you in? You look like my brother. You're the sign. I remember my brother when I see you. Qasim begins to cry again. His mother is watching. She can't take it. She says, Qasim, I remember when your father was leaving this world. He wrote a ta'weez and tied it on your arm. He said, if ever my son falls into the greatest difficulty, ask him to open it and read it. Qasim dries up his tears, opens up the ta'weez, looks at it. On it was written, his father had written, Ya Bunayya Qasim, إذا وجدت عمك الحسين غريبا وحيدا عطشانا مظلوما. When you see Qasim, your uncle is all alone and he's gharib and he's thirsty, then go and give your life for him. Qasim smiles. He goes running to his uncle. He says, uncle, look at this. They say Sayyid al-Shuhada looked at it, looks towards Medina, says, brother, in my time of ghurba, you didn't forget me. In my time of ghurba. Hadith says that both nephew and uncle hugged each other so much that both of them passed out, crying. They say Sayyidah Zainab came. With her tears, she woke both of them up. At that moment, the tradition says, Imam Hussein says, I'm going to put Qasim myself on the horse. He takes out a mail of armor. That mail of armor was there to protect somebody from arrows. When he puts it over Qasim, Qasim was small. The mail of arrow was big. Qasim turns around and says, uncle, let me go into the battlefield without it. Here when Mukhtar was rounding up the army of Yazid, he asked him what happened on that day. They said one thing that moved all of us when we saw a small boy. His face was like the moon. As he was coming onto the battlefield, we could see it was a Hashimi moon that was coming. They say Hussein put him on the horse. Qasim comes into the battlefield. A man by the name of Azraq sends one son. I can't recite it. That one son Jahannam, second son Jahannam, third son seven, all of them gone. Azraq himself comes. Qasim kills him. At that moment, Umar ibn Sa'd says something. He says, all of you attack him. Everyone begins to attack Qasim. Small boys on the horse. One side they're attacking. Second side, one person comes from behind, hits him on the head. Qasim falls. He says, uncle, come and help me. Sayyid al-Shuhada, like a lion, begins. The worst thing about this is this. As Sayyid al-Shuhada begins to move forward, they say the army from the west started going to the east, east to the west. The young man was there, body became trampled. All you could hear was ribs were crushing. Body was being trampled. They say Qasim in his lifetime, his body was there. When Imam Hussein came, he looked up and he said, what has happened to my... He took his abba, put it down, picked up all of the pieces as he was coming back. This is the time when now Farwa looks towards Zainab, says, Zainab, I said my son Salim, what is this that Hussein has on his... Matan Hussein.
بشبر کی رو کر پکارے میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی لوگ کرتے ہیں کیوں آہوزاری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی کوئی دھولا کی پھپھیوں کو لاؤ ان کی چھوٹی چچی کو بلاؤ دیر ہوتی ہے جلد آواری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی جا کے کہہ دو یہ شاہ زمین سے کوئی سغرا کو لائے وطن سے جائیں اکبر منگائیں سواری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی بے وشبر کی رو کر پکاری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی میری بالی سکینہ کہاں ہو کیوں نگاہوں سے اب تک نہا ہو نیگ لے جاؤ بانوں کی پیاری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی کوئی قبر حسن پر یہ کہنا دیکھ تو جائیں بیٹے کا صحرا ان کی فرقت میں آنسو ہے جاری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی بے وشبر کی رو کر پکاری میرے بچے کی آتی ہے مہندی لاشا قاسم کہاں نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کہاں نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کہاں نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے اس گھڑی روئے بہت اس گھڑی روئے بہت شیخ کو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے مہندی ارمانوں کیا تو میں لگا کر مانے مہندی ارمانوں کیا تو میں لگا کر مانے صحرا ماتے پہ آئے صحرا ماتے پہ سجا یا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے رو کے سینے سے آئے رو کے سینے سے لگا یا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور آبا میں ڈالے ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور آبا میں ڈالے باندھ کر لا شاہ باندھ کر لا شاہ اٹھا یا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے زخم تیروں کے آئے زخم تیروں کے جنازے میں لحظن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے اس گھڑی روئے بہت اس گھڑی روئے بہت شیخ کو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے
حسین یا حسین پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہے بیبیاں پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہے بیبیاں پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہے بیبیاں پامال لاشا دیکھ کے زہرا کی طرح ٹوٹی ہے قاسم کی پسلیاں پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، ٹکڑے پکار داشت میں لبیک یا حسین، ٹکڑے پکار داشت میں لبیک یا حسین، آ کر کہا جو مولا نے قاسم ہو تم کہاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال جیتے جی جو ہوا ہے اسے سلام، پامال جیتے جی جو ہوا ہے اسے سلام، رو کر لہو یہ کہتے ہیں خود صاحب زمان، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے بیبیاں، پامال لاشا کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، آ جاؤ میرے بھائی تلک بولے یہ حسن، آ جاؤ میرے بھائی تلک بولے یہ حسن، قاسم نالو حسین کی غربت کا امتحان، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، ٹکڑے اٹھانے لاش کے سرور کے ساتھ ساتھ، ٹکڑے اٹھانے لاش کے سرور کے ساتھ ساتھ، زہرا گئی ہے دشت میں جانے کہاں کہاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں، پامال ہونا لاش چچا کی یہ سوچ کر، پامال ہونا لاش چچا کی یہ سوچ کر، لپٹا ہوا سموں سے ہے فروا کا نوجوان، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے دی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ در کہتی، مادر کرے گی کس طرح دیدار آخری، مادر کرے گی کس طرح دیدار آخری، اے سمو کے چاند سے چہرے پہ ہے نشان، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، پامال لاشا دیکھ کے کہتی ہیں بیبیاں، یا حسین،
لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے، لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے ترس پانی کو جو کوثر کے پلانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد ہو گئی شام انہیں شام کے بازاروں میں ہو گئی شام انہیں شام کے بازاروں میں ایک بیمار کلا کو ہے ستانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد والے زہرا کہتی بخشوا دوں گی انہیں محشر میں زہرا کہتی بخشوا دوں گی انہیں محشر میں جو میرے لال پہ آنسو ہے بہانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھر والے لٹ گئے آل محمد والے پانی تک تو نے نہ مانگا میرے مظلوم حسین پانی تک تو نے نہ مانگا میرے مظلوم حسین تیگو خنجر سے پیاس اپنی بجھانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے بولی زینب جو گری خاک پہ تصویر رسول بولی زینب جو گری خاک پہ تصویر رسول چل بس یاد بنا نا کی دلانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے والے رو کے کہتی تھی سکینہ میرے چاچا ہو کہاں رو کے کہتی تھی سکینہ میرے چاچا ہو کہاں لوٹ کر آئے نہیں پانی پلانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے بولی فضا نہ انہیں مارو ذرا شرم کرو بولی فضا نہ انہیں مارو ذرا شرم کرو یہ تو نبیوں کی بھی ہے شان بھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے والے ترس پانی کو جو کوثر کے پلانے والے لٹ گئے آل محمد کے گھرانے
ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو گیا ہے ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو گیا ہے ٹک ٹکڑے اٹھانے رن میں، ٹکڑے اٹھانے رن میں، شبیر کی ابا ہے ابن حسن کا لاشا، پامال ہو گیا ہے ابن حسن کا لاشا. علی ہے اللہ کس غضب کا یہ سانحہ ہوا ہے، اللہ کس غضب کا یہ سانحہ ہوا، مظلوم کربلا کا، مظلوم کربلا کا دل خون رو رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو گئے ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پام. صحرا میں ہر طرف سے آواز آ رہی ہے، صحرا میں ہر طرف سے آواز آ رہی ہے، کبرا سہاگ تیرا، کبرا سہاگ مٹی میں مل رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو گئے ہے، مارا گیا بھتیجا بیوہ ہوئی بھتیجی، مارا بھتیجا عباس کا کلیجہ، عباس کا کلیجہ اس غم سے پھٹ رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو گیا ہے، ابن شبیر سر جھکائے میت کو لا رہے ہیں، شبیر سر جھکائے میت کو دل میں غم و علم کا، دل میں غم و علم کا طوفان اٹھ رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو. یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، حسین 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 یا امام. السلام علیکم ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکم ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم ابن امیر المؤمنین و ابن سید الوسیین، السلام علیکم ابن فاطمۃ الزہرا و سیدۃ النساء العالمین، السلام علیکم ابن خدیجۃ الکبریٰ ام المؤمنین، السلام علیکم یا ابو الفضل العباس یا ابن امیر المؤمنین، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکم یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکم یا شمس الشموس یا ایہا المدفون بارض طوس، السلام علیکم یا سلطان یا ابو الحسن یا علی ابن موسی رضا، السلام علیکم یا معصومکم، السلام علیکم یا شہداء کربلا جمیعا ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان 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 من فتنة الزمان، شریک القرآن، کعبۃ الایمان، امام الانس والجان، عجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وسهل اللہ تعالی مخرجک وظہورک وجعل اللہ من انصارک وآوانک ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. اللہ صلی علی محمد. نعرہ حیدری.
Hey, Kumail. Yeah. Sorry, bro. Oh, no problem. He had to go to the bathroom. No problem. He was doing his dance, and I didn't want to.
Do you know how to turn the lights off for the...
I think it's over there.
Is it off?
Yeah, they're off.